Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Book Bites. And I'm very excited to have the gorgeous Julie Bennett with me today. Hi Julie, how are you?
Hi Sandy, really well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course I'm having you. Julie is not only a beautiful writer, but she's also a very dear friend of mine. So I'm very excited to have you here today to chat. Though I might forewarn people, when we get together, we do tend to giggle a bit. So this could be punctuated with a lot of laughter. This episode.
I hope so.
Kate's joined us from Tassie. Hi, Kate. How are you? Nice to see you today. Before we get started, Julie, we're talking today about dual timelines, which is obviously a topic close to my heart. For anyone who's read my books will know that. I'm just going to pop the details of the giveaway up because I tend to forget these things if I don't do them in the right order. For anybody who leaves a comment or asks a question during the live stream here now, or up until midnight on Saturday night, if you're watching this back later, you will go into the draw to win a copy of Julie's beautiful new novel, The Lost Letters of Rose Carey, which I finished last night, and it is a fabulous story. So even if you just say hi, you will go into the running for that, and you want to trust me on that one. Yvonne is here. Hi, Yvonne. Nice to see you again as well. So, Julie, as we said, today we're talking about dual timelines, and I wanted to ask you first off, what drove you to do a dual timeline for Rose's story?
So I've done a dual timeline this time, and I also did it with my previous novel. And what I'm trying to show is that women, no matter what era we live in, we all have issues and we all have challenges that we need to strive to overcome. And I wanted to demonstrate that even though these issues and challenges might be very different in different eras, they're still very real, and that one generation actually can help the forthcoming generation to understand how to deal with issues, no matter what they are. So women, they need resilience, they need strength, they need courage. And I think certainly in the case of my modern day heroine, I think she struggled a little bit with whether she could actually handle the challenges that were coming her way. And so by having her learn about Rose through the letters, I think she came to understand that this was a woman who had actually gone through quite a lot in life, but who actually came out, pretty well at the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about Rose and Emma in a little bit more detail in a moment. From a writing perspective, how do you find the balance between the two threads? So we've got 2024 and 1924 in this story. How do you decide whether it's chapter by chapter, a couple of chapters and then you switch, when, how will you switch, that sort of thing?
That's interesting, because what you're touching on is plotting, which I always said I wasn't a plotter. I always said I was a pantser, and I feel like I still essentially am a pantser. But with this novel, I did plot it a lot more than I plotted my first novel. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that was so that you can hold together the string or the arc of the narrative a little more tightly. And in the case of, what I wrote first and how I followed up with each chapter, in the beginning, I tried to write 3 chapters of the first narrative and then 3 chapters of the next narrative. But as you know, I'm sure, Sandy, it's not quite as religious a process as that. And sometimes it would be, well, after chapter 1, I really feel like I need to write the chapter of the next narrative. So I wouldn't let things get in the way of the writing, because as you know, that's the challenging bit. So although I did have a guide to myself of 3 chapters at a time, I wasn't really just about sticking to it at all.
So you would just go based on instinct then? You might write a few chapters in Emma's storyline and then chapters in Rose's.
Yeah. And also, because I did plot a little bit, I knew where the story was going a lot more this time. And so you kind of write to points. I wrote to points in the story. And sometimes the action was quite fast and I wrote quickly to that point, and you go, oh, that's only a chapter and a half. Well, I'll make it into 2 and then I'll go to the other narrative. Because I think if you interrupt or you're too strict with yourself in terms of the plot, then that does sort of hamper creativity. Yeah.
So once you've got it all down on paper or on the screen, the case may be, do you then find yourself having to rearrange those chapters? Like if we've spent too long with one character or the pacing isn't quite right, and move them around a bit?
Yeah, I move them around a lot. But I kind of know that when I'm writing it. There is a chapter that's just one sentence, and I knew that it was always just one sentence. And I knew that in particular, that chapter might move around because I think it was rather dramatic, if I do say so myself. And I knew that it would be key where I put that chapter. So I knew I did write it at a particular time, or in a particular time, but I knew that it would move depending on where that I thought it would have the most impact. And and sometimes your editor tells you move this or move that, and of course they're experts, so I listen to them a lot.
Excellent. The Understudy, which is your other book, which I will pop a picture up of towards the end of our chat, is also dual timeline, correct?
Yes, correct.
Yes. Did the process change between the two?
I always say the process of writing The Understudy and the process of writing Rose were as different as chalk and cheese. And I think that's partly about, The Understudy was my debut. And so you have a very personal sort of connection to it and you love it and you're just immersed in it. And the process was much more sort of gut instinct and much less plotted. But I think it's a learning process, whenever you do something like this, as all writers will understand. But when you come at it, definitely the dual narrative was, in that case, 5 chapters at a time for each narrative. And that was partly about trying to move the story along for myself, so, okay, if I give myself these 5 chapters to tell this part of the story, I will give myself the liberty to write another 5 chapters. But what I realized then was, coming to Rose Carey, was that, yes, it was good to be able to motivate myself to make sure I had the discipline to sit down and write 5 chapters at a time. But it was actually more liberating to go with a shorter 3 chapters, sometimes only 1. It was more liberating, and I felt like the process became freer.
Yeah, right. I'm just going to pop up a few comments that we've got. Kate is saying that the book sounds wonderful. Wait till we finish talking about it, and you'll be there to buy it. Maxine has joined. Hi, Maxine. Nice to see you. And Yvonne has a copy of The Understudy, but she hasn't read it yet. I think we can both understand to be read piles that take us a while to get to, don't we, Julie?
I have one too.
Multiple piles. But,
yes.
Attended to. I don't know about you, but when I first started writing, and I had 2 really rough manuscripts behind me before I started doing courses. And one of the things they teach you on the course, or tell you, and it's kind of a golden rule, or at least it was back then, don't write in multiple points of view, and don't write in multiple timelines, because as a beginner writer, it's just too hard. Obviously, all of mine are multiple points of view and multiple timelines. Were you wary of doing multiple points of view and multiple timelines when you first started, or was that just where you naturally sat?
I think it was a very natural choice for me. And the thing about my creative writing journey was, I'm not sure if I should tell this story or not, but I was a child in the 60s, and the 60s was a very liberating period of time. And I remember that my primary school education was very much about encouraging you to do things in a creative way. I had a really fantastic primary school teachers who did not insist on things like, very structured paragraphs and sentences and punctuation and grammar. They just encouraged me in particular, but I think the whole class, just write your story. And for me, that has been the mentality I've had since then, since I was a little girl and learning, to write. And I absolutely felt like it was an expression of who I was. And I didn't really play by rules. And in fact, I didn't really know that those were rules. So there you go. Now I do. But that said, I was also a journalist. So, I spent quite a few years as a journalist where you certainly learn the craft of writing. So I think those two things came into play for me when I started writing. Well, when I feel like I've written all my life, but when I wrote a novel that was published, those two things came into play. You have to be very disciplined. You have to know the English language very well. You have to know about structure and about pacing and about drama. But I didn't learn those creative fiction rules or whatever at all. I just applied my kind of journalism skills to the process of creative writing because creative writing is my passion and my love and my hobby, and so I didn't want to be restricted, by rules.
I think that's, excuse me, absolutely fabulous. And I hope that the pendulum swings back to that style of teaching creative writing. My daughter finished the HSC and she hated English with a passion.
Oh, that's so sad.
And part of the problem was, even when they were doing creative writing, they were really prescriptive. You have to start it like this. You cannot do that. And it was so, like, there was nothing creative about the way they were teaching creative writing. It blew my mind.
And I feel like once I knew that there were those sorts of things going on, I certainly never studied it like that. But I just naturally didn't go there because that writing is my passion, because it is my, stress relief, because I don't want to be in, it's sort of like when you knit or when you sew or when you paint. If you are too prescribed by rules, it actually, for me, stops the flow of creative ideas. And I think that's dangerous in fiction.
Yeah. It's the exact opposite of fiction, isn't it?
Well, I think so. But as I said, I did learn formal writing as a journalist. So in one way, yes, you do play by certain rules, but you have to know enough rules to be able to have the courage to break some.
Yeah, good point. Kel's joined us. Hi, Kel. Nice to see you here. Kate has a question for you, Julie. Do you have a writing schedule? Do you sit down at 10 a.m. and write to 12, or do you write around other things? What's your process like?
Hell no schedule for me. So, and I say that a little bit tongue in cheek because, of course, when you're on a deadline and you're writing a book for a publisher, you have to meet those deadlines or ask, can you please extend them? So it's a little bit tongue in cheek to say there's no schedule, but for me, writing's like breathing. I just love it, and I do it whenever and wherever I can. So lots of people say, "Oh, do you have where's your writing space?" I'm going, writing space? It's on my knee. Like I have my laptop. I have a laptop with a tray with a beanbag underneath that my husband bought me, and I put the laptop on that and I write there. And I once broke the screen of a very expensive Apple laptop because I was sitting under a tree and I closed it on a branch or a twig. And so, so I take the laptop almost everywhere I go and I write all the time. But of course, I also run a PR business in financial services, so I have to write a lot. And the beauty of living in this modern era is that I can write anywhere. So I do. And that's because I love it. So no formal schedule, but I just write all the time. Yeah.
And Kylie has joined us, and Kylie has a question as well. How did you decide to become a writer? And I guess what was the transition from journalism to fiction for you, Julie? And is there anything that you do that inspires you when you're writing a book?
So just to take those one at a time, I decided to become a writer when I started to learn to write. And I think I said this as a child. So I think I said this when the understudy launched was when I first went to school. I mean, I was obviously 5 years old, but in those days, your parents didn't teach you to read or write. That my parents read to me a lot, and that I think I learned how to spell my name. But, today sort of parents prepare their kids a bit more before going to school. So I first came into contact with the alphabet really at school. And I remember thinking that it was beautiful. I loved the alphabet. I thought it was art, and I particularly loved the letter A and the letter S. They're just so beautiful. And I guess that was my indication that I would be always in love with the written word, and the style and the beauty of the art of the alphabet. And then because my parents read to me such a lot, I loved stories, really loved them, and started to write under these very beautiful primary school teachers, self-expressing on the page. And I just always thought I was a writer. That was who I was, and I always expected to be a novelist. And then one day in my 50s, I woke up and I said, yeah, well, you're all talk girl, because you got no published books at all. I had written a lot of books, but they hadn't become published. And I had a very stern chat to myself in my 50s. And I said, you know what? You keep saying this, but you haven't done it. So either you do it or you shut up. And so I thought, I will just give this my reddest, hottest go. I will try very hard. And if I'm successful, that's amazing. And if I'm not, I know I did what I needed to do, and that's okay. That's okay. If you try really hard, but you don't get what you want, that's still okay. But I did try, and I did do it.
I love that. I love that.
Fabulous. I feel very lucky because there's lots of people who are very talented out there, and I'm very lucky. So what inspires me is wonderful women, women who've done amazing things, but also everyday women like my grandmothers. My grandmothers were born in the early 1900s, and they went through the Depression, and their husbands went to war, and they had to raise babies by themselves and all this sort of stuff. They were just very strong women, and you take that kind of person that you know or knew, and you look for other inspiring women, and there's so many of them around. And I do think there's a wealth of stories that still need to be told about really strong, interesting women.
Excellent. We're going to get to two of them in just a moment. There's just a comment from Maxine before we do. She's referring back to your primary school teacher here. And your comment that, you have to know the rules to be able to break them. Her daughters in the 70s were encouraged just to write, not worry about the spelling. She doesn't like that, but the rules can come later. Yeah, they can come later, particularly if we're talking about creativity.
Yes.
And when we're talking about fiction, that is a creative process. It's very different than writing, a court report or a medical report, that sort of thing, Yeah.
That's technical writing. So in the sense that my teachers were very enthusiastic, encouraged me very much to just put my ideas down on paper. It wasn't that they didn't correct, for example, things that were misspelt. They did, but it wasn't the big red pen X, blah, blah, blah. It was actually, I remember that I didn't understand paragraphs. I didn't understand how long a paragraph could be. So to err on the safe side, I put a sentence for every paragraph. And my teacher thought I was trying to write poetry, which is lovely of her. And in fact, it was just that I didn't know. So, just one day she just quietly pulled me aside and said, Julie, a paragraph is just an idea. So you can put several sentences into a paragraph, contain one idea. And, this very gentle encouragement of creativity was really wonderful, in my opinion. Yeah. And I think also, sorry, I do rabbit on a bit, but also when you learn foreign languages, so I learned a couple of foreign languages at school, and there you have to know grammar, right? So you have to learn grammar, and it's different grammar from English, but that also helps. Those are rules then that you learn. So that was helpful as well.
Excellent. Rosalind has joined us, and she's agreeing with you about the beauty of that creativity and that process. So we need to actually talk about the lovely, beautiful ladies in the book, The Lost Letters of Rose Carey. Carey or Carey?
Carey. I say Carey. You can say it however you like.
Rose. Beautiful Rose. But before we get to Rose, who is obviously our title character, I want to talk about Emma. Emma is the protagonist of the modern thread of the story, so in 2024. And she's a young woman, a videographer, and she finds some an old film reel and some old photos and some letters. And I wanted to ask you, where did Emma come from?
So this is so interesting, because I studied Rose a lot. You know, obviously she's inspired by Annette Kellerman, so I did a lot of research into Annette Kellerman that we'll talk about later. But Emma just came to me exactly as she is. And when you're a writer, that is such a gift, isn't it? You know, a character just walks in, sits down, you know.
Fully formed.
Yeah, fully formed. Like I knew her name. I knew what she did for a living. I knew her personality immediately. She just came in and sat down. You know, that's the best way for me to describe it. And I knew exactly who she was. And it was just, but that's what's so gorgeous about writing. You know, sometimes that happens. And when that does happen, you just thank the universe, because it just helps you as a writer. You don't really, I don't want to say I didn't have to think, but I mean, you're just so inspired by this.
That's
and you just grab this person and go, okay, sit, talk to me. And so she wasn't inspired by any one person in particular, but I think her personality, I have known some of these introverts in my time, being an extrovert mostly, and I recognize that, you know, that sort of protective shell that some people put around themselves, but on the inside they're very sensitive. And so Emma takes a bit of understanding, but I knew her and I love her just as much as Rose. Yeah,
it's interesting you talk about her being the introvert, because she is behind the camera, not in front of the camera. Dresses all in black, which isn't unusual in any entertainment setting. You know, stage crew and that always do wear black because they're not supposed to be seen. And she speaks to a genealogist at one point. The woman's never seen her. She's been there the entire time and hasn't even noticed her, which was a really lovely way of describing her character, I think. I liked that part.
Thank you.
Now, Emma, our beautiful Emma, is dealing with some, relationship challenging moments in her relationship, shall we say, with her wife, and they're trying to have a baby, and it's not going particularly well. What I found really beautiful was the dynamic between Emma and her wife, Lauren. It's just so honest and relatable. I think no matter who you are, no matter, who you're partnered with, no matter your age, it's just a beautiful dynamic between the two of them. Was that something that came naturally to Emma when she came and sat down with you, that this really honest, relatable?
Yes, and she's so I also knew Lauren quite well, because it was, and when I say things like this, I'm sure people think I need that I'm a bit crazy, but I heard Emma say, I need someone bright and bubbly and beautiful, and I knew I saw Lauren just the same. She's not quite as close to me because she didn't have her own voice. She talks through Emma, but I saw her too with her beautiful tight blonde curls, and her sassiness and her brightness. I knew she was the perfect choice for Emma. But Emma is just so in love with her and wants to do everything she can to make Lauren happy, that I think Emma sometimes puts herself second. So she's always thinking about, how can I help my wife? What can I do to make her happy? And if I can't give her a baby, what's going to happen to us? She's quite fragile like that, even though hopefully by the end of the novel, she comes to realize she's just not as fragile as she thought. And I hope that she's learned some of that by learning about what Rose went through, which was a quite different challenge. But it's the process of how you deal with it as a woman, struggling with issues, that you're stronger than you think, right?
Yeah. That saying, a woman is like a tea bag. You don't know how strong they are until you stick them in hot water.
Indeed. Indeed.
We're going to move into Rose in just a minute. But before we do, when Emma discovers the old film and the photos and the letters, she feels this instant connection with this perfect stranger to her. And she's determined to find out where these letters came from and why the film has never been seen, because she knows Rose was a very famous person in her time. but this film has never been seen by anyone. What's the driving force here for Emma to find this out, to find out what happened to Rose?
I think there's just a little. Emma gets this kind of feeling that she's somehow connected to Rose, and I think what happens is that she's in this vulnerable state. She's at the shoot at the Carrington Hotel in the Blue Mountains. Go and visit, guys. It's beautiful. And she finds this box of tricks, and she wants a diversion from a message she's just received from her wife saying her wife's not pregnant. She needs a diversion. So I think when you're in this vulnerable state, you look for things that take you out of your own sadness. So she becomes easily captivated by this story as a diversion, and she feels a kinship and a relatability to these letters for reasons she doesn't really understand. She wants, and that's what keeps driving her. She goes, there's something behind these letters. Why do I have these letters? I must have these letters for a reason. So but she's also trying to find out what actually did happen to Rose and why the film never made it to the screen. I know we're running short on time, so I'm trying not to babble.
No, we are very casual here at Book Bites. We are certainly not going to be finished in the next 3 minutes. That's fine. Joe's joined us from South Australia. Hi, Joe. Nice to see you. Maxine's had to duck off. That's okay. We can always watch the rest of it later, Maxine. And both Kate and Joe like the tea bag, saying it's one of my favorites.
Good.
But obviously we have to talk about Rose as well. Rose is our protagonist in 1924. So we're 100 years apart between these two beautiful.
1923, actually. Yeah.
23, sorry. Yes. And Rose is a movie star, very famous movie star. She's Australian, but she's been working in the US and in London as well. She's well known around the world, but she has the audacity to be turning 35, which is big no. And so she's
way too old.
Yeah, way too old for Hollywood. Some scandal had happened, in her life, and there's a bit of an issue with her career and her business, and we're not going to go into any spoilers.
Good.
But there's the hint that maybe somebody is trying to sabotage her career and her business. She's a very strong and independent woman, particularly for the 1920s. She's a little bit outside of the mold, I would say, for 1920s women. Did she come easily to you? As easy as
so as I said, it's inspired by Annette Kellerman. Annette was this hugely accomplished woman. She was a swimmer, she was a diver, she was an actress, and she was a vaudeville actress, and she was a silent movie star, although of course you don't call it silent movies when you're in the period, because they just call them films. And then as she got older, she started doing things like fitness routines for women and taking these series of educational talks around the world, I think, in fact, and promoting health and fitness for women, writing books. She ran a health food store in America in her latter years, and then she returned home to Australia to retire with her husband. And she was also, I was talking about this yesterday, actually, she was also a wonderful promoter of the Southern Hemisphere, Australia and New Zealand. And she wanted to drive tourists to our hemisphere because she said, I just can't believe that people are not like flocking to the boats to come and visit us. And all we need to do is keep having these movies set down under and get people on the boat. And you know, bit like Paul Hogan, you know, with his tourist Australia tourism ads. You know, she just thought that the world needed to see Australia and New Zealand, and she was a wonderful promoter. But the thing about her was she was so out there. You know, she was such a self-promoter. For example, she said she was arrested on a Boston beach for wearing a swimming costume that had no, just had no legs on them, so her naked legs. There's no historical evidence to suggest that she was actually arrested, but she didn't let the facts get in the way of a good story, right? So it was all splashed all over the newspapers. But what that did was it popularized the modern swimming costume for women and liberated them from these swimming clothes that had the capacity to drown them. Not only did they inhibit swimming, actual swimming, they could actually kill you, So in the beginning, I'm going, God, Annette, you're just making this stuff up, But in fact, what she was doing was highlighting a very real problem. And in that way, she did, impact the world of sport for women in quite profound ways for the everyday woman. And I came to love that about her. Like, I thought she's just full of self-promotion, I thought in the beginning. And then I went, yes, but for a reason, and not just for herself. Not just for herself, but for women in general. And so that was very inspiring for me when I came to the character of Rose. Lots of the things that Rose did, are things that Annette did. And it's so powerful. The only thing I would say, though, about Rose was I wanted to, because Annette was so super amazing and had accomplished so much, I wanted to keep Rose a little bit tighter because I wanted to make her more identifiable, that yes, I think you can be a famous movie star, but if you're also all these other fabulous things, the everyday woman might feel a little bit more distant. And what I'm trying to convey with, through the two timelines and also through the two characters was you don't have to be a superstar to be a superwoman. Yes, Annette and Rose were super women, but I hope that you can see through the learning that Emma went throughout the course of the novel that you can take insights and inspiration from these amazing women, but it doesn't mean you have to be a superwoman yourself in order to be a superwoman.
I think we need to get that put on T-shirts. You don't have to be a superstar to be a superwoman. And I reckon we'll all be signing up to get one of those T-shirts.
I'll autograph it.
You're so right about Rose. Yeah, she's this famous movie star. But because we're in such close proximity to her, because the historical thread is told through her point of view, we get to see her as just a woman dealing with life issues that we all have to deal with. It could be any business that could be in trouble, the relationships that she's dealing with and questioning certain relationships and that sort of stuff. And she's somebody that starts out not believing in love, and has to go on a journey there. I won't tell you where that journey ends. It's stuff that you and I might be going through.
Absolutely. And that's what I wanted to portray as well, is that the relationships that you have and how your perspective on them changes over time. And I'm not just talking about your romantic relationships, but relationships with your friends and people that, people that in your life that you love fiercely, even those relationships change. Sometimes they soften, sometimes they, become more stronger, and sometimes they don't. And it's very hard to judge as you go through life where your relationships are sometimes. In the case of Rose, because she's so famous and she's such a superstar, she feels threatened by she knows, she's feeling the threat. She knows there's a threat, but she doesn't know where it's from. And I think that must be very difficult for superstars. Yeah.
And I think the other thing that stood out to me was when she does find out everything that has happened and who's behind what and how it all falls into place. And again, no spoilers here. I guess she has a choice at that point in time to be bitter and resentful about it, or to be kind and gentle about it. And I'm not going to tell you where Rose landed. But that's a really interesting question that I think we all, if a relationship, again, whether it's romantic or friendship or whatever, does go belly up, how we respond to that is really important, isn't it? Because that's all we've got at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I don't want to give away the end either, but I think Rose herself matures, over the course of the novel. She takes a lot of relationships for granted. And there's a price to pay for that when you take a relationship for granted. And I think she grows and matures by the end of the novel, which is why it resolves the way it does.
Yeah, she does. We still don't know. Yvonne said she can remember seeing a movie about Annette Kellerman many years ago. I'm going to come back to Annette in just a second. Bev's here. Hi, Bev. Thanks for joining us. She'll watch the start later. And Joe said very true. And I can't remember when that one popped up, Joe. I think it was about relationships changing over time. I think that was when the comment popped up there. Now, we've mentioned Annette Kellerman, who was the inspiration for Rose. And I'm sure we could talk for another hour about Annette herself. But what I wanted to ask you specifically was, when you were researching Annette's life and picking and choosing what was going to inspire Rose, was there anything that really surprised you in that research?
Yes, I guess because in the beginning, I obviously had heard of Annette, but I didn't really know terribly much about her, and I started because I love the performing arts, and my family has a performing arts background, and I knew I wanted to do a film actress. And sorry, I'm really old-fashioned. I use the feminine form of the words, but I found a book on early Australian film, and there was a number of really interesting people in it. So Lottie Lyle, who was a director and a writer and an actress, and there's a Film Academy Award named after her and her partner Raymond Longford, but she died very young. And then there was Louise Lovely, who was actually also an international movie star in the 1920s, and there was the McDonough sisters, who were Australian women who put together a series of films, but they were all in Australia. So Annette had this brilliant career. So did Louise, but she had this brilliant career, but she'd had such a journey, and she'd metamorphosed, is that how you say it? From being a performer and a swimmer to an actress, and then, these sort of a campaigner for women's health and fitness. So she had a journey that was very inspirational. I think what really surprised me was how audacious she really was, and we forget, because we actually live in quite liberated times, but the things she was saying and doing were quite out there. I came across an article yesterday that I'd been using in my research, and it was a reprinted article, reprinted in the 1970s, but this woman, a female doctor in 1899, had written an article saying that women who were athletes risked becoming degenerates because it would spoil the human body. It was bad for the female body. Sorry, the female body was bad for the female males to exercise, and they'd be far better off spending their day in bed. That was better for their health and fitness. Okay. Wow. And in the middle of this article, I'm just ashamed I don't have it here, there's a picture of Annette Kellerman and her health and beauty routine, and saying that in front of all of this dialogue, she goes, well, here's my health and fitness routine. That's really pushing back, isn't it? That's going like, yeah, whatever, lady. Like, even though the lady was a doctor, a medical doctor, she's going like, no, here's the health and fitness regime. And we forget, because we weren't in that era. Yep. We forget how strongly she and people like her must have pushed back to overcome those sorts of attitudes. Of course, she was a little bit later than 1899. She was in the early 1900s, 1910, 1920. But even so.
Yeah, even for that time.
Amazing.
And there's still things that they tell us today that we shouldn't do as women, which is like...
I really hate the word shouldn't. I really hate the word.
Now, before I let you go, Julie, I've just got a couple more questions. And if anyone watching has questions, pop them in now. And if you are watching this back later, feel free to drop any questions into the comments that you might have for Julie, and I'll make sure Julie sees them over the weekend and can answer them in there for you. This is where you can find Julie online, and here are two beautiful, beautiful covers that she has for The Lost Letters of Rose Carey and The Understudy. Both of these novels are set within the world of entertainment. We've got opera after The Understudy, and film and entertainment with Rose. What is it about this kind of a world that draws you in, Julie?
Well, it's because I come from a performing arts family. My dad was an opera singer for 30 years, and I was on stage as a child actor in the Sydney Opera House in the 1973 season when the Opera House opened. So to me, it's a magic world. I feel like it's magical, and I always have. And I just, even though some people have said, yeah, it's just a job, I went, oh, blasphemy, it's not just a job. To me, it was magic, and I still feel, you know, frissons when I go to the Opera House and walk in under those magnificent stairs and up into the one of the theatres. It's just the most beautiful world, and a world in which fantasy is encouraged, indulged, and celebrated. So that's what I love about performing arts. I also love I love visual arts as well, but that's another story that might be coming soon.
Which actually is my next question. What is next for you?
I'm currently researching another novel. I don't think it will be dual timeline this time, but that's probably all I can say, except I would love to set it in the 1960s. So, yeah.
Okay. Oh, and again, that was a question I had here. So in Lost Letters, we've gone into the 20s. In the understudy, it was the 70s. Is there another historical time?
I just love the 60s. I think the 60s was an amazing period in Australian history, and now is apparently quite long ago, so it's considered historic. You know, as so I was alive,
the 70s are considered historical. You and I are historical, Julie.
I know. Well, aren't we lucky that we are? We are lucky, we're fortunate to be here.
That's true. That's true. There's a comment here from Bev. The understudy was a brilliant book, and she's looking forward to reading Lost Letters. Carey. Julie, we could chat all day, and we will actually be seeing each other in person next Wednesday, so we can hopefully chat a little bit then. I know you'll be surrounded by a lot of people who want to talk to you then. Thank you so much for joining me on Book Bites today.
Well, thank you. It's been lovely. It's always lovely to talk to you, though, Sandy.
We will see you again soon, guys. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you. Bye.
Oh, hang on. One more comment. Sorry, Yvonne, I'm going to out you here. Yvonne's even older. She was a child in the late 40s. I don't think that makes you more than historical, Yvonne. I'm not sure the correct word is there, but we'll see.
Thanks, Yvonne.
Thanks, guys. See you later.